What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and we have got three of us on the screen tonight. Matt Moreno joining us, Daniel Starkin, as usual. And guys, 51 days until opening day. It's an exciting time to be a baseball fan. Obviously, there's lots of Dodger news, Trevor Bauer, all that kind of stuff that we're going to get into. Matt, we haven't heard your thoughts on Trevor Bauer, so hang on to those. But we appreciate everybody joining us on YouTube, Periscope, Facebook. As always, this is Dodger Heads presented by DodgerBlue.com. And I see people chatting about Justin Turner. We're going to get to Justin Turner. We're going to get to all of it. But let's start with the big news of the day, of the week, of the entire offseason, which is the Trevor Bauer conversation. In case you hadn't heard, the defending World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers went out and signed the defending National League Cy Young Award winner Trevor Bauer to the highest per year contract in baseball history. Is essentially what it'll end up being. He'll make $40 million this year, $45 million if he chooses to opt into the second year, and then the third year is $17 million, basically injury protection for him. And so, Matt, I'll jump straight to you because Daniel and I did a live show breaking this down as it was happening on Friday. But I guess I'll start with this. Have you been surprised over the last few days with how people have reacted to the Bauer signing and how Dodger fans, national media, etc., have responded to everything that went down?
A little bit. I mean, I'll definitely start off that I was surprised, period, that the Dodgers signed Bauer. I know Andrew Friedman has kind of tried that in the past where, hey, we'll give you a huge annual salary for a couple, short years. It hadn't worked yet. As much as Bauer had kind of, said that I think it was a bold take. I never really believed it, that he would do kind of the 1-year contracts for the rest of his career. I didn't believe that. So I was surprised by that. I was then also surprised by how positive the reaction has been, because I think Trevor Bauer obviously has a reputation that has been established, good or bad, however you want to view that. There have obviously been some social media stuff that I'm sure he would like to have back, and he has admitted that he would, he handled those situations incorrectly. There is a segment of fans who are upset with the signing, and I can understand their standpoint, but still overall, I was surprised that it's been so positive and very much about the Dodgers adding to their rotation, as opposed to the focus being that the Dodgers are bringing in someone who could kind of disrupt either the clubhouse or just, take this risk on a player who's kind of ruffled some feathers.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, what about you? How have you been? I mean, I think all of us maybe weren't necessarily prepping for a reaction because none of us were really expecting this to actually happen. It was rumored, it was mentioned, but it never really felt like it was a serious thing until the day before when they said, hey, the Dodgers and the Mets, 2 teams left. But so not really knowing what to expect. I mean, what has your take been as far as seeing people respond to the Bauer move?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Matt on this one. First of all, I'm still shocked that they actually signed him. Like, I was not expecting that at all. Like, I knew they were linked to him all offseason. We knew he wanted to play for the Dodgers. Like, it's his hometown team. It's a chance to win. But I just didn't see them giving him that type of money, even on a short-term deal, just because of all the past issues. And also, even on the field, like, he's been pretty inconsistent. So I don't know if you want to be paying $40 million this year and $45 million next year to a guy who you really aren't out of him. But at the end of the day, I trust in the Dodgers front office. If they, they obviously evaluate him and they do all the background work, everything, that you're supposed to do. And they came to the conclusion that it was a good idea to sign him. So I got faith in them that it was the right decision. And as far as the reaction goes, I was surprised at how positive it was. I was expecting, when we did that live show right after the signing next week, I was expecting everyone to come in and be all mad and saying, why did we sign this guy? Why did we give him money? But for the most part, I feel like it was mostly positive. So I was definitely surprised by that.
Yeah, it has been interesting, right? Because we I feel like there's a small segment of the population that is sort of the I'm never going to watch Dodger baseball again. Screw the Dodgers, And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, these people that are, commenting on our videos and whatnot, saying I don't understand why Bauer's even controversial to begin with. It's such a bizarre sort of dynamic to have both of those two groups of people existing. And it's like, well, if you're not sure, just Google Trevor Bauer. There have been about 20 articles written in the last 4 days explaining why people are skeptical. And on the flip side, the people who are boycotting, it's like, look, Daniel, I think you said it best on our live show. Hey, you're entitled to do whatever you want to do. And I think there's valid reasons for people to be concerned about Trevor Bauer's personality. Now, as you also pointed out, most of that stuff is 2, 3, 4 years old. He's gotten positive reviews from all of his current or previous teammates. Not all, I should say, but in Cincinnati and Cleveland especially. Arizona was a bit of a rocky road. He was a younger guy, so maybe he gets a break there. But I guess I would just say I've been fascinated by the debate. There's one side that can't believe that anybody would like this guy, and the other side that can't believe anybody would find him controversial. Now, as always, 90% of people are firmly in the middle. That's like, hey, you know what? Like, being a sports fan is a complicated thing. You typically have to have guys on your team that aren't your favorite people. They either disagree with you politically, or they disagree with you religiously, or they're just have done horrific things. And Dodger fans, I think for the most part, have been pretty fortunate to have avoided that. But here we are. Now there's controversy right in the middle, and there's lots of people, Mets fans at the top of the list, that are probably hoping this goes down in flames, and we'll see what it happens. So, Matt, I'll come back to you. Aside from the off the field stuff, I'm curious, now that we are days removed from the actual signing and you've had time to process it, how big of a deal is the Dodgers signing Trevor Bauer in your estimation?
It's pretty significant. Obviously, he's coming off a great season, and like Daniel alluded to earlier, in terms of his career, it's very much been a mixed bag. But even when evaluating that, obviously you're gonna put more weight into 2020 than you are 2017, 2018, really. And I think the Dodgers front office and their scouting and analytics, and the guys from Driveline that they've incorporated in the organization, they have definitely earned the trust of fans in saying, hey, like, for the most part, we know what we're looking for. We can bring someone in, and not that Trevor Bauer needs to be, quote unquote, fixed or refined by any means, but there could be something that they see that he does or did exceptionally well last season that they can further fine tune and just kind of build upon for this year. So assuming that is the case, I think it's a rather significant signing. Also because, I was of the belief that they did need pitching in some sense. David Price, saying that he is going to play in 2020, saying that he's going to play this season helped. But with Julio, Dustin, and Tony Gonsolin, you saw some inconsistency with each of those three last season.
Yeah.
So I figured, like, with the depth they would get through the year, but now having Trevor Bauer, he's stayed healthy, like, so at minimum, like, he's going to be a middle of the rotation starter for you.
Yeah, it is a fascinating thing to think about, right? Because I mean, the defending World Series champions, who by some people's metrics had the best starting rotation in baseball already, just added the National League Cy Young Award winner. And yet I feel like that lead has been buried with all of the other stuff. And so I'm still trying to I guess I was just so blindsided by this happening. I mean, even again, those 24 hours when it was Dodgers and Mets, it just always felt like even down to 2, it wasn't a 50-50 shot. It felt like a 20-80 shot. And yet here we are. So I'm still trying to process. Daniel, from your perspective, I mean, I don't want to overreact, but I mean, in the history of the Dodgers in the last 25, 30 years, what was a bigger free agent moment than this one? They just handed a guy $40 million for 2021 and $45 million for 2022. They handed him the two single biggest years of a contract in all of baseball history. And obviously the Mookie deal was different because it was an extension and a trade and the whole deal. But as a pure free agent signing, this is insane.
Yeah, it's huge. And if you look at the contract, and you actually look at what it is, the per year, the what he gets what year, it's actually a really interesting contract that I think was set up pretty well for both sides. Like Bauer made it clear kind of all along that he wanted to do a shorter term deal, not necessarily the 1 year deal like Matt mentioned before, but we knew he wanted to do a shorter term deal, and the reason for that was because he wanted to be the highest paid player in baseball. And I don't know if anyone was gonna give him the Garrett Cole 9-year, $300 million offer, but this is a pretty good compromise where he gets, for the next 2 years, he gets to be the highest paid player in baseball. He could opt out after either of the 2 years. But because the Dodgers were able to add that third year for a really, easy relative price of $17 million, like that brings down the overall AAV. So it's actually kind of a manageable contract. So I really like the contract as a whole. I also think it's not getting talked about, but Bauer's agent deserves a ton of credit for like negotiating this deal. We just talked about everything that's kind of wrong with this guy. Like he's got the sketchy past on social media. He's inconsistent on the field. And at the end of the day, his agent got him a deal where he's not only the highest paid player in baseball, but he's also going to the defending world champion. So he has a chance to compete, and it's also in his hometown. Like what more could you ask for?
Yeah, and I mean, even just thinking about, you made a great point, and Matt, you mentioned this earlier, sort of the inconsistency of Bauer. I think that's the other element that's interesting to me, is to think about how good is Bauer, right? Because we look at the numbers and say they just signed, this huge contract, but how good of a pitcher are they getting? Now, Daniel and I are going to break down some of MLB.com's top 10 positional rankings. Bauer did not crack anybody's top 10 starting pitchers in all of baseball, which is interesting considering, again, he was the defending Cy Young Award winner from last year. ESPN in their fantasy rankings, Bauer's the number 4 guy heading into 2021. If you look at projections like Zips and Steamer, he's 6th in WAR or 9th in WAR. But the point is, like, we're talking about a high-level pitcher, and again, I don't have a full breakdown, but I was looking at starting pitching in baseball. You've probably got Garrett Cole and Jacob deGrom, maybe Bieber, Giolito, Scherzer. Maybe those 4 to 5 guys kind of in their own tier as the elite pitchers in all of baseball. And then back behind them, you've kind of got 15 guys sort of lumped together, I would say pretty evenly. Darvish, Buehler, Lamet if he's healthy, Nola, Flaherty, Castillo, Kershaw, Woodruff, Strasburg, Sale, Verlander, Glasnow, Greinke, Clevenger, Bauer, in some order, right? I'm not putting any of those guys in order, but if you think about that, those are the top 20 starting pitchers in all of baseball. And when you classify a number 1 starting pitcher, obviously if you're in the top 20, then you're a number 1 starting pitcher. The Dodgers have 3 number 1 starting pitchers. They have 3 of the top 20, and again, depending on your ranking system, it might be like 3 of the top 12. The Astros have 2. The Padres have 2 if Lamet is healthy, which I think is unlikely. But, I mean, besides those, nobody even has more than 1. Maybe the Nationals if you want to add Corbin. Padres could get to 3 if you had Snell. The Reds if you had Sonny Gray. But those guys aren't in my top 20. And so we could argue about the list, but that's sort of my point, is that not only have they handed out like this massive contract, which is a record-breaking contract, but if those 3 are healthy, the Dodgers just added one of the top 20 starting pitchers. And when we come to the playoffs, and like Matt, you mentioned, is pitching an issue? Well, you just added 2 elite starts to a 7-game series. Like it's not 2 out of 7 games, and like 6+ innings in both of those games are getting added. Not to mention in the regular season, one of Bauer's most underrated qualities is his availability. Going back to 2014, he has not had a season under 26 starts, except for last year, which was shortened, but I don't believe he missed the start last year. So I guess, Matt, I'll come to you with this one, which is how good is Bauer? I mean, do you have him in that tier of a number 1 starting pitching, or because of the inconsistency, do you kind of bump him down a level?
Well, first, I just want to say all our viewers can direct their Padres complaints only to Jeff. That was him not putting the Padres rotation as the best we have ever seen.
Hey, the Athletic had the Padres number 2 before Bauer even signed. So, this isn't a screw the Padres moment. If any negativity on Padres pitching is deserved anywhere, it's our boy Daniel up here because of how much he loves the sheriff, Chris Paddock. Okay, so keep that to him later. But totally. Matt, go ahead. Do you have Bauer as a number 1 starting pitcher?
It's not a number 1 to me.
Okay.
I think he's a very good number 2. If he produces another season similar to last year, then he definitely enters that conversation of being a number 1 starter for a rotation. And I think really what it's going to boil down to is just expectations. I mean, I personally am not expecting Bauer to replicate what he did last year. It was, more or less historic. Obviously, it was against the NL Central, and that's been written about, and how those offenses weren't exactly prolific. So fine. So, but he doesn't. The trade off is that he doesn't need to be that kind of pitcher. I mean, I imagine he's going to be slotted behind either Kershaw or Bueller. So he's either he's probably the best number 3 pitcher in baseball, or definitely the best number 4 pitcher in baseball if you have David Price going third.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, what about you? Is Bauer a number 1 starter in your mind? I mean, and obviously, like, I'm not just talking, is he the best on the Dodgers, or like, would he be the best on another team? But I mean, do you have him as I would say top 20, those guys, maybe 15, somewhere in there is the number 1 starter line. Is he in that group for you?
Yeah, he is in that group for me. Not just because of what he did in 2020, but for me, it's mainly about like his work ethic and his desire to be great. Like this guy works as hard as anyone in the league. He's pretty much the poster child of Driveline. So he's familiar with all the analytics, all the different things. So this guy, even like when he's not pitching well, he's going to want to be even better. And when he is pitching great, like he's going to want to be the best in the league. Like he has that desire to be great. And I think that fits in perfectly with a Dodgers staff that's filled with other guys like that. Walker Buehler wants to be the best. Kershaw wants to be the best. So I think those guys, they're all going to push each other to be great. And I think having so many bright minds in the same pitching staff is only going to help them all get better. So I don't know if he's a number 1 starter, but I don't think he has to be on the Dodgers, kind of similar to what Matt said. Like if a playoff, we talked about this after the signing, but if a playoff series was starting today, like he's either your game 2 or your game 3 starter, probably, right? Like I'd probably start Kershaw game 2 to split up the 2 righties. So there's not a whole lot of pressure on him to go out and have another Cy Young type season. But if anyone's going to do it, it's him, just because he has that work ethic and desire to be great.
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, Daniel, I'll stick with you. I'm imagining this scenario, imagining you're Andrew Friedman and you're negotiating, and at some point you need to walk into the owner's office and tell them, hey, we're about to sign a guy to a contract that's essentially going to pay him $85 million over the next 2 years. Yes, we're the World Series champs. Yes, we already have the best roster. Yes, we already have the best rotation. What would be your message be? Like, how do you justify, if you're Andrew Friedman, spending $85 million on a pitcher like this, adding it to a team that, again, as I've said, is already the best roster in baseball?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a couple different things he could have said. One is he could have showed him all the moves the Padres made and said, hey, they're in our division. They're coming. We still think we're better than them without Bauer, but we have this opportunity to add a guy and kind of put an end to all the noise we've been hearing. And that's exactly what they did. We know Andrew Friedman typically isn't motivated by moves that other teams made, but I don't know. I think this could be the one time that maybe he was, because it's not like the Dodgers needed Bauer by any means. But yeah, and another thing is just the fact that they've stayed below the luxury tax. I think it's the last 3 seasons in a row, and they have a lot of money coming off the books in next offseason and the one after that, with Kershaw's contract's up, Kenley's contract is up, Joe Kelly's contract is up, Pollock's up in 2 years, Price is up in 2 years. So they don't have a lot of long-term money given out right now. So they could afford to kind of splurge now and maybe go over the luxury tax for a year or two, and then could always, get back under 2 years down the road after they win 2 more rings, hopefully.
Matt, anything you would add to that as far as the justification? I mean, that's the one thing I've seen from Dodger fans who don't like Bauer as a person, is kind of like, why do we even need this? And I mean, the short answer is it's not like there's a ceiling and you can only go up to that ceiling. There's no point in not always trying to get better. But I also can't understand the point where it's like, do we really need to add to what seems like a luxury, right? It's, we talked about, hey, the Dodgers rotation is great, but if you can get Bauer, that was kind of the message all offseason. Well, they could, and they added him. So do you have any sort of questions or issues about the idea to go spend $85 million on a position group that, according to The Athletic, was already the best starting pitching group in all of baseball?
No, not really. Because like I said, I was of the belief that they did need pitching in some capacity, whether it was going to be Trevor Bauer or just, some middle of the rotation starter. Like Daniel said, it's a short-term contract. I don't necessarily think we can rule out a David Price trade either. It's not something I would want to see. I think they should definitely keep this rotation as is for the season. And if you need to, quote unquote, justify it, I think you just say, look, this is kind of proverbial sort of move that I think the fan base has always been clamoring for, right? Like that's always
Yeah.
been the knock on Andrew Friedman is they're not trying to win now. It's always, we need to maintain flexibility. Well, now they won a World Series last
Yeah.
year. They signed Mookie Betts to this huge contract extension. They've added Bauer, and they still have, they're not completely under financial stress because of luxury tax penalties. So they're sort of in a sweet spot right now where you can win another World Series or two, hopefully over the next, upcoming seasons, and then you clean your books again and just reevaluate and go from there.
Yeah, it is interesting. People saying, "Oh, this is so unlike the Dodgers." It's like, well, no, they've offered this contract to like 4 people in the last 3 years. It's just he's the
Yeah.
first person to say yes. Like
Yep.
they offered this contract to Garrett Cole. They offered this contract to Bryce Harper. Those guys just said no, and so obviously that's where it is. But you mentioned salary cap stuff. Let me get into that because I do think it's interesting. I think the number one question on anybody's mind when Bauer signs is, what does this mean for Justin Turner? What does this mean for Corey Seager a year from now? What does this mean for Clayton Kershaw a year from now? Daniel hinted at this, but let me just walk through a little bit of the salary cap numbers, and then Daniel, I'll come to you and you can react. But 2021, they currently have a payroll of around $235 million. The luxury tax number is 210, so well over that. That obviously does not include Justin Turner should they sign him. 2022, that number drops to 133 million, so about 100 million less. Again, if they were to sign Justin Turner, that number would go up. It also does not include Walker Buehler's arbitration number, Cody Bellinger's arbitration number, and Julio Urias' arbitration number. The reason it gets so low is because Kenley's 20 million comes off, Kershaw's 31 million comes off, Seager's 14, Taylor's 8, Knable's 5. There's also a Joe Kelly team option, which I have joked you can write in stone they will not be picking up the $12 million Joe Kelly team option that year. So even if all those numbers come off and you were to say to Kershaw, hey, we're going to give you the 31 million that you were making last year. I don't think he makes 31 million, but let's just say for the ease of math that he gets that, you're still freeing up around $45 million for Corey Seager and some bullpen reinforcements, Chris Taylor if you want to re-sign him. So even with a $210 million luxury tax hold, if you give Corey Seager, let's say $25 million, even with the arbitration numbers, you're probably still right at, if not under, the luxury tax number, all things equal. So that's, I think, interesting and important to note, is you can re-sign Kershaw, Seager, and still have Bauer, and still come under the luxury tax number in 2022. 2023, it gets even easier. Salaries down to $73 million. Cody Bellinger is a free agent. AJ Pollock and Trevor Bauer both have player options. Obviously, the odds of Bauer picking that option up. Basically, the only confirmed contract is Mookie Betts. Max Muncy and Blake Trinan are club options. Canely and David Price are the guys who come off. And 2024 and beyond, it's literally only Mookie Betts' contract that is on the Dodger books as guaranteed. So all those things considered, Daniel, as you look at the Dodger financial system and the financial setup over the next few years, you kind of hinted at that, but I don't see this impacting Seager and Kershaw. Now, maybe a guy like Chris Taylor, I mean, he could be an interesting one where do the Dodgers feel the flexibility next year to go pay Chris Taylor $10, $11, $12 million that he could probably go get on the open market? I mean, we saw Kike get 7. Chris Taylor is dramatically better than Kike Hernandez in just about every facet of his game. So that might be a guy, but I don't see it impacting the high-level guys like Bellinger, Buehler down the road, Seager and Kershaw, etc. What about you?
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree that it's more of kind of the middle tier guys that would be impacted. And we saw kind of this offseason, they didn't re-sign Jock, they didn't re-sign Kike, and it turns out all that money went to Bauer, right? If they weren't paying Bauer $40 million, they easily could have re-signed both those guys and brought them back. So, yeah, I think the front office is very well aware that Corey Seager's up next year, and then Cody Bellinger's down the road, Walker Buehler's down the road. They're very aware of that, just as the fans are. And I'd have to imagine re-signing all 3 of those guys is absolutely their top priority right now. So I don't think they would put any of that in danger by signing a Trevor Bauer. And I think it honestly worked out perfectly that he was the one guy who was willing to take this short-term type deal but his deal will be over by the time, most of those guys are free agents other than Seager. So I actually think it works out perfectly, and that's why they did it.
Yeah, yeah, and it is worth noting too, like exactly like you said, this won't impact Bueller, this won't impact Bellinger, and if anything, as a fan, it kind of gives me a little bit of hope because it says, hey, clearly that $230 million, $210 million
Yeah.
line is a soft line, you know. So as long as they can get back under and reset when it comes to Seager, when it comes to Bueller, when it comes to Bellinger, and all three of those guys are then on their extensions. Now Kershaw will likely not be on the books anymore just because of age, but it basically is encouraging to me, wouldn't you say, Matt, that hey, at least they are willing to go over. They are a big market team that is not afraid to spend like a big market team if the right opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I know the fans have been frustrated with how the Dodgers operated, over the past 3, 4 years financially. Um, but it made sense. I mean, they kind of had their plan and they've stuck to it, and it's worked. I mean,
Yeah. They
2020,
won
we
the
don't
World
need to,
Series last year.
right? And they made it in 2018. Sure, they were overmatched by the Red Sox. 2017, we know what the issue was there. So really, like the outlook could be a lot better than what it is even now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a couple people too. I'll throw this in there. A couple people asking about how the luxury tax works because every league is radically different. The NFL, the NBA, baseball. Baseball is, I don't know, maybe the most confusing, maybe the least confusing. There is no technical salary cap. $210 million is the luxury tax number, and every dollar you spend over that gets an additional tax on top of it. I believe it's 210 to 230 is one percentage. When you go above 230, it's an even higher percentage. If you go above
Yep.
240, that's when you start your first round pick will drop 10 spots in the draft. So that's of current concern for the Dodgers because if they were to go get Justin Turner, then it would put them over it. I'm convinced personally that Turner is coming back and also that a trade is going to happen somewhere. I think everybody is kind of like, oh, well, let's just trade David Price as if it's like I think he would net you something. I think it's just a matter of, are the Dodgers wanting to shed some payroll? Because if they do, then David Price makes the most sense. He is at sort of a position of excess and also has a huge enough salary to get them back under the 10 draft pick consequence kind of deal. But yeah, I just don't know how big of a deal that is to the Dodgers. Or, because if they do trade a Dustin May or a Tony Gonsolin, for example, well, your salary cap's only going to go up from there because those guys are making the minimum. So I guess we'll end this segment. And Matt, before we let you go, I'll come to you, Matt, first, and then Daniel. Give me a prediction for the Dodgers. Again, I think I said 51 days until opening day. Give me a prediction of how you think this plays out. Do the Dodgers go into the regular season with all 7 starting pitchers that they currently have? Does Justin Turner come back? Give me a couple thoughts on how things play out in the next 51 days.
Yeah, so as much as I'm supportive of them signing Bauer, I will kind of look at it a little bit more critically if it means that they don't re-sign Justin Turner, just because there's a huge need at third base and there isn't a clear-cut internal option.
Yeah.
He bats right-handed, which is what they've been looking for that. So I do think ultimately he is brought back. And I think David Price is unfortunately traded just for all the reasons you kind of touched on. It'll be salary driven. I don't want to call it a salary dump because that would suggest that he's not an adequate pitcher, which I think he still has plenty to contribute. But just kind of looking at where the Dodgers are financially, it just kind of makes too much sense, I think.
Okay, so Daniel, he's got Turner coming back and David Price heading out in a swap. What kind of prediction you got for the next 51 days?
Yeah. For me, there's 2 options, and that's one of them right there. I think that one makes the most sense. I think it's pretty clear that everyone wants Justin Turner back at this point. So I don't know if they want to. They've already pissed off a lot of people by signing Bauer. I don't know if they want to, send out the rest of the fan base.
Do you really want to
Turner
sign a guy, Daniel, who had COVID and came back onto the field at the World Series? You want to sign that kind of locker room? I'm not even downplaying that, but I did hear that argument this week, so I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're going to be critical of Bauer, then you also got to be critical of Turner for that. No, but we all know everyone loves Justin Turner at the end of the day. But for me, the other option would be if you for some reason you're not seeing eye to eye with Justin Turner and it looks like he's heading elsewhere, that's when you could maybe try to shop one of the other starters, May or Gonsolin. Those guys I'd say both have pretty significant trade value right now. They're both coming off really good seasons. Like you said, they're both making absolutely no money right now. They're both under club control for like 4 or 5 more years. That's got to be very appealing to a lot of teams around the league. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like both of those guys would be like top 3 starters in like more than half the teams in baseball. Whereas in the Dodgers, they're number 6 and 7 respectively on the depth chart. So it's just an embarrassment of riches. But I feel like if you were to trade one of those guys, you could bring in a quality right-handed bat back, a third baseman, whether it be, Eugenio Suarez, maybe Matt Chapman. Who knows? I don't know. I doubt Oakland's listening on him, but hey, one can dream, right? Chris Bryant is also an option, although I feel like he's making a lot of money and it's only a 1-year type deal, and I doubt they'd want to pay him and Seager next offseason. So I don't know if Chris Bryant's a great fit, but there's other options out there, guys whose names we haven't even heard, who you never know what Friedman's cooking up. So to me, those are the 2 different options they got out there. Right now, the 40-man roster is full, which is why they haven't officially announced the Bauer signing yet. So they're going to have to clear up some roster space either way. So, yeah, I think there's definitely going to be a move coming pretty soon here, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got Turner coming back. You agree with Matt there, and your prediction is that not David Price, but either Gonsolin or May would be moved. Is that a prediction, or you're just throwing out an option?
Well, no, for me, the 2 options is you trade Price to save the money, and then you re-sign Justin Turner, or you trade one of the young guys for a third baseman, which means you keep Price and you're also not re-signing Justin Turner because the other, whoever you're picking up in that trade, would be the third baseman.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think Turner comes back. I don't think they're going to lose this one over money. I mean, unless he goes out and can find a 3 or 4 year deal, I just don't see it happening. Yeah. I mean, the Dodgers have given themselves less wiggle room. They still have wiggle room, but less wiggle room financially over the next 2 or 3 years. I don't think they want to add, a 40-year-old Justin Turner to that list 3 years from now. So I'm with, I think, assuming he can't get a 3 or 4 year deal anywhere, which I don't think he will at this point, I think he comes back to the Dodgers for sure. And as far as the 40-man roster goes, it is interesting, and I never remember when the season officially starts, but as soon as the baseball season starts, I think it's in spring training, Caleb Ferguson will go on the 60-day IL, as will Tommy Kahnle, and both of those guys will then open up 40-man roster spots. So I don't know if they're going to wait all the way, 2 more weeks to sign Trevor Bauer, or how they're all going to make that work, but I don't think people have to worry about whether or not Trevor Bauer is going to be a Dodger for sure. So, yeah, I'm with you, Daniel. I think if Justin Turner comes back, I don't think it makes any sense to trade Gonsolin or May, because that would only increase your salary, which is not what you're trying to do. Yeah. I almost just think they just say, screw it. Like, let's just make a run and keep David Price around, see what we got. And who knows? I mean, they could keep David Price for the first 2 months of the season, and if he's having a great year, then maybe they trade him at the deadline, because his value probably isn't as high now as maybe they think it should be. So definitely, we got some people in here in the chat saying Joe Kelly should be traded. Look, if you could trade Joe Kelly, I would drive him to the airport. Okay. In non-COVID world, I would drive him to the airport. Just like the people who say they want to trade Kenley Jansen's $20 million salary. I hate to break this to you, unless you want to package Gonsolin with that $20 million salary and get nothing in return. Jansen and Kelly will both be on the roster this year. So there we go. So, well, hey, we're going to let Matt Moreno go. We appreciate him joining, giving us his thoughts on Trevor Bauer. Daniel and I are going to stick around and talk some MLB.com rankings, positional rankings, and that kind of thing. But Matt, enjoy the rest of your night, and we appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, the next topic here for Daniel and I to discuss is MLB.com, released over the last few weeks, top 10 positional rankings across every position. We've got catcher, first base, second base, etc. And this was a list that was heavily populated by the Dodgers. I think there are positions where you and I, Daniel, were surprised positively. There were positions that we were surprised negatively. If you've been following our YouTube channel, which, by the way, thank you. Please subscribe. Please click the notification bell. I had some thoughts on one of the positions, which we will get to. I know you have some thoughts on at least one of the other positions that we will get to. But let's go through this. We can go position by position. I've got graphics we'll throw up. Now, I'm going to throw up a guy by the name of Mike Petrello's. You might recognize that name. He used to be a Dodger writer. He now writes for MLB.com. I'm going to put his top 10 up. He was one of 4 people that offered their rankings. So I'm going to put his up, and I'll kind of mention the other ones as we go. But let's start with the catcher position. All right, the catcher position, this is how Mike Petrello had things ranked. He had Yasmani Grandal, JT Realmuto, and then Will Smith, number 3 among all catchers. Now, you might think, wow, that's really high. Smith finished third, 4th, and 5th on these 4 rankings. So, Daniel, I'll just come right back to you. Will Smith as a top 3, top 5 catcher. Any surprise for you?
No surprise. I mean, I was surprised they put him that high, I guess. But for me, if I was making a list, I think that 3 spot is pretty good right now. He arguably had the best offensive season for a catcher in 2020, and that was coming off a 2019 debut season where he was, just as good. So now we have not 2 full years, but we have 2 separate years where he was able to produce at a high level. And for me, at the catcher position, there's hardly anyone that could do that.
Yeah.
So I think the 3 spot is probably about right. I think the 2 guys ahead of him, Yasmani, who we're all familiar with, and JT Realmuto, those guys have been doing it for a while now. I think maybe we're 1 year away from maybe Smith passing both of them if he has another elite year in 2021. But I think right now I'd say the 3 spots, just about right.
Yeah, Grandal's got the advantage of some defensive stuff for sure. Realmuto, I think, is just more of a name brand. I think people just probably have trouble putting him down below. But, I mean, if you gave the Dodger the choice between those 3, obviously they already chose Smith over Grandal once. And so, I mean, Daniel and I have gotten a mailbag question of our top 5 Dodgers of all time. He did not make my top 5, but Will Smith is my favorite Dodger on the current roster. I mean, aside from Kershaw. But Will Smith, kind of the young guys, of this new generation of Dodgers, Will Smith is my guy. So I'm glad to see him get some love there. The next position up is first base. And again, this is another position that I was pleasantly surprised at the ranking. Here are Petrello's rankings. He had Max Muncy 8th. Now, you might say, why were you pleasantly surprised with Muncy being 8th? Well, this was the worst ranking of the 4 people that Muncy had. He was ranked as high as 2nd and 2 fifth-place votes. So he was the 2nd best first baseman on one person's ballot, 5th on the other 2, 8th on Petrello's ballot. You look at some of the names here, Freddie Freeman, Luke Voigt, goes on down the list. Your thoughts on Muncy being the 8th? I guess I would say I was happy that he was 8th, and then I look at the list and I go back and I say, you know what? He actually might deserve to be higher on this list. Like, I'm not sure some of these guys. Paul Goldschmidt used to be great, is kind of beginning to slump off. I mean, I could see how Muncy gets up closer to 5 on some people's list.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'd have him higher. I get it. He didn't have his best season in 2020 by any means. But at the end of the day, like, it's a short 60-game season. You would expect, if it was a full year, his numbers would have came around and been a little better. We even saw it in the postseason. Like, the guy was a walk machine in the postseason. He was getting on base so much, hitting big home runs. So, yeah, I think Muncy should have been a little higher. There were a couple guys on there who also had poor 2020 years, like Matt Olson. I think he had 3rd. So if you're going to dock Muncy for his poor year, then I feel like you got to do the same to the other guys. And we saw prior to 2020, we saw 2 absolutely elite years from Max Muncy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I probably would have had him a little higher, probably like 5th or so.
Yeah, and I mean, I've mentioned it on the show. I think he's underrated defensively. I know of all the guys on the Dodgers, Muncy's errors tend to be the biggest and most high profile.
Yeah.
But the 99% of the time that he isn't sort of making a massive, not top 10 type play, he's really good. He just digs up Turner and Seager their throws and just makes it look easy. So I'm glad to see Muncy getting the recognition he deserves. And I mean, we were talking about contracts earlier. Muncy, oh my gosh, is a bargain that the Dodgers, they bought out the remaining arbitration years from him, as well as I believe at least one free agency year. And as a result of that, I mean, they are getting an absolute bargain. He's under team control until 2023. They can bring him back for a club option for, I think, less than $15 million. So you can pencil that
like
one
10,
in.
12 million.
Yeah, so pretty impressive stuff. All right, second base is the next group up, and you're not going to see any Dodgers on this list. The second baseman for the Dodgers, maybe Gavin Lux. The guy that most people actually did mention was Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor finished 8th on 2 of the 4 ballots. He was not ranked on the other one, although Petrello did mention later on Twitter that he had basically forgotten about Chris Taylor, didn't know where to put him, and had he put him on this list, that he definitely would have been in the top 10. I mean, I know we've got a friend in the comments that loves Tommy La Stella, who comes in at 9th on this list. I think that's a starting point to say, I think everybody would take Chris Taylor over the last 2 guys on this list for sure. Jose Altuve is a fascinating one. There are some people that had Altuve way lower. I mean, we're biased as Dodger fans. I think most people don't classify him as a second baseman, and even if they do, they're probably not paying attention to how good he's been. But I was excited for Taylor to get love, and I'm assuming the other person who didn't rank him just didn't consider him a second baseman.
Yeah, I mean that's completely fair, right? Like we don't know if Taylor's going to be playing. I know he's not going to be an everyday second
Yeah.
baseman. He's going to be moving around. So because of that, it's hard to really quantify like what you view him as.
Yeah.
But as far as the 10 guys on that list, yeah, I'd probably have him around like 7th or so. Like Chris Taylor is one of the most underrated players in baseball. You
Yeah.
really have to watch him on an everyday basis the way we do to see like what he brings to the table. Like he's just kind of a low-key guy like in general, so it's not like he's out there being super flashy. So yeah, Chris Taylor, very solid player. If he was the Dodgers' everyday second baseman, I'd probably have him around 7.
Yeah, offensively, I mean, just go look at the guy's numbers. He's
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, like, and that's not even to mention the fact that he plays a really competent left field. I mean, he's the best defensive left fielder the Dodgers have. He plays a competent
Yeah.
short. He plays a competent third, a competent second. He could play. I mean, he could play center field. If the Dodgers didn't have Cody Bellinger, he'd probably be their everyday center fielder because of how
Yeah.
good he is out there. And so, and again, offensively, he's better than that. He is a well above average bat, no matter where you put him. So for sure there. Well, all right, Daniel.
Yeah,
We'll get
real quick.
Yeah.
If there was like if they did like a top 10 utility player list, I think he'd be number 1 on that
Yeah.
list personally.
Well, you compare him to some of these other guys like La Stella and Fletcher and
Yeah.
Marwin Gonzalez. I mean, those guys, their value. I mean, even Kike Hernandez. Like those
Yeah.
guys, their value is in their versatility. Period.
Right.
Taylor is both versatile and actually an above average hitter. That almost
Right.
never exists. You know, going back to a Ben Zobrist type. I mean, that's probably the
Yeah.
closest comp that we have for a Chris Taylor. So, all right, well, Daniel, this is the part where I think you start to get a little bit irritated, which is the shortstop category, all right? So I'll throw Petrello's list up here. He's got Seager third, which I'm assuming you would be perfectly fine with, as Seager is third, behind Tatis Jr., behind Lindor, still ahead of Trevor Story, Trey Turner. I mean, shortstop is loaded. Look, Carlos Correa is number 10 on this list. Again, we don't like the Astros, but that just gives you a sense of the type of depth we're talking about. Seager averaged about 4.5, somewhere in there. He tied for 4th, as far as I could tell, as far as sort of overall votes, if you want to count it that way. Where do you think Seager, I mean, looking back at this list, Tatis Jr., Lindor, Seager, Story, Trey Turner, how do you see him ranking in that group?
Yeah, I feel like those top 4 or 5 guys, they're all pretty close. Like those are elite type players, like guys you build a franchise around. So I feel like I wouldn't be mad if anyone had them anywhere in the top 5 there. Where I kind of got a little worked up was the Shredder had him 6th, which to me was just crazy. Like I don't know how you watched that guy play baseball last season and came to the conclusion that he was the 6th best shortstop in baseball. Personally, I would have him probably first, to be honest with you. Like, and I know I'm obviously biased, but
no surprises here, Daniel. I'll just throw that out there. No surprises
but I mean,
here. You
look,
take him over Tatis Jr.?
We saw them both in the same series last year, and you can tell me who was better, right? I mean, no disrespect to Tatis. He's a great young player. He's gonna be one of the top players in baseball. But at the end of the day, he's still 21, 22 years old. We have not seen a full season's worth of work from him. Like, yeah, he had a nice little 60-game season last year. He had a great rookie season, but was hurt for like half of it. So I don't know how you could put that guy first when there's so many other great players there. For me, if I was debating between for 1 and 2, for me, it's Seager and Story are the 2 top guys. They're the 2 guys who I think could put it all together and be the best. And I think Tatis will get there eventually. I still think maybe he's another year or 2 away. I got to see him do it for a full season. But yeah, those top 5 guys, they're all so good that like it's hard to complain. Like I'm not gonna be mad that someone put Lindor over Seager. Like Lindor's a great player. So yeah, shortstop is just incredibly stacked.
Got it. Okay, some people in the chat mentioning some music. I don't hear any music on our end, so apologies. Apologies there if it's coming off. Got it. Okay, it's coming every time we flip to a new slide. Got it. We'll get that taken care of. Yeah, I mean, I think that if you were to argue against Corey Seager, I think it would be something as simple as the consistency. I mean, you mentioned it, right? He's coming off his best season, and yet if you go back before that, there was injury concerns. There was inconsistency that even when he was healthy, he was never seemingly fully healthy. So I would say I can understand him being as far as 6th. I wouldn't do it after seeing the season and then the postseason that he put down. But I guess I can buy into this fact where you say, hey, you know what? Maybe this top tier is 5, 6 deep, and maybe Seager's at the back of that just because I haven't seen it consistently. I'm with you. I mean, I would take Corey Seager over Trevor Story. I would take Corey Seager over Trey Turner. I wouldn't go so far as to say I would take him over Tatis based on like a 3-game series that happened in the playoffs. But not to mention, he almost hit a home run. I guess almost doesn't count, right? But
almost don't count. You got to get it over the fence and over the gloves for it to be a home run.
I love nothing makes me happier, Daniel, than when you say something like, with all due respect, or I don't not to offend anybody, because it's like right after that is coming but I'd take Corey Seager over any of these guys. So yeah, I hear you there. I mean, I think he ends up right where he probably belongs, which is totally fair and totally reasonable. So let's move on. Let's move on to third base. And obviously for the Dodgers, do they have anybody here? No. Justin Turner potentially coming in at 8th on this list. He was 6th on one list, 7th on another, 8th on this one, and not ranked on the other one. And so, Daniel, as you look at this list, I mean, obviously Justin Turner is going to be a Dodger here, we think. Where would Justin Turner rank for you on this list?
I think that was pretty right. I'd probably put him up one more spot ahead of Urshela. But if you look at the top 6, kind of similar to Shortstop, like it's super stacked. All those guys are superstar type players. So I don't have any problems with where he is. You also have to take into account his age, right? This is a list ranking for 2021. So we don't know Justin Turner at 36, 37 years old. We don't know if he's going to be able to maintain, that star level production that we've seen from him. So yeah, I feel like he came in right around where he should be.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, nothing to see there. It will be fascinating to see how Justin Turner ages over the next few years. We've already started to see him not quite able to catch up to fastballs quite like he used to, although he made some fantastic defensive plays, obviously, in the playoffs and did have a couple home runs as well. And so he strikes me as the quote-unquote professional hitter type, where he's not reliant on his athleticism, which is encouraging. But the downside is, again, we've already started to see some slippage when it comes to high fastball velocity, and we know that's the trajectory that baseball is headed on. And so it'll be interesting to see there. Now let's flip to left field. This was one in which the Dodgers were not represented. A.J. Pollock would be the Dodger representative here, but as you can see, did not crack the top 10. He was not ranked on any of the 4 lists, although Mike Petriello did have A.J. Pollock 4th on his, quote, just missed list. So for you, Daniel, does that feel about fair? When you think about top 15-ish left fielder?
I don't know. I feel like he belonged on that list, to me at least. Like some of the guys at the bottom of that list were far from spectacular, like Winker, Clint Frazier, Dom Smith, and Mark Canha. Like I think I might take Pollock over all those guys. If you look, I feel like maybe Pollock's becoming one of the more underrated players in baseball, because when that guy's healthy, he's produced at a high level pretty much always, like especially with the Dodgers. When he got hurt, his first year with the Dodgers, he got hurt, and definitely with Pollock, the injuries are a huge concern. The guy's been hurt a lot, so if that's the reason someone left them off their list, like I have no problem with that. But since he came back at the All-Star break of 2019, like this guy's been absolutely elite. And we saw the year he had in 2020, like the guy was going through so much adversity coming in. He had his baby was born prematurely. He had COVID, and we weren't sure if he was going to play or not. And he reports like a day or two before opening day, and then just goes out and rakes and hits. I think he hit like 17 homers and had like an 870 OPS. So I think Pollock's really underrated. I would have had him on my top 10 list.
Yeah, I feel like A.J. Pollock's one of those guys that I personally, I mean, I've liked him, but I feel more connected to him than ever, simply because I feel like I've had to defend him. I was always an A.J. Pollock fan. Even when he was in Arizona, I felt like he was really good at just tracking his game, and I liked just sort of the approach that he had, the way he played the game. So when he came to the Dodgers, I know there were some skeptics. I mean, that was the biggest free agent contract that Andrew Friedman had ever handed out pre-Trevor Bauer. And so there were some skeptics, and they were proven right over the first couple years as he battled injuries and struggled in the playoffs. But as you pointed out, was really, really good last year. I still think he's fine defensively. I mean, he used to be an elite center fielder. He's not that anymore. But he's playing left field. I mean, he's more than capable of playing out there. And so, yeah, he's not a guy I was expecting to be in a top 10 list. And yet, when, as you pointed out, when you look at some of the guys on there, it's like, man, for 2021, some of those guys might have a higher upside. But if you're just asking me to pick one and slot him into left field, maybe we're spoiled as Dodger fans where we don't need Pollock to be a superstar. We can just be content with him being, sort of above average. But that was one that, our initial thoughts were, that makes sense. Not expecting to see him on this list. And then that's just because I didn't know how not deep left field was. So center field, maybe the least controversial of any of these lists. Cody Bellinger, second on every single person's ballot. First is Mike Trout on every single person's ballot, as it should be. But I think this speaks to where Bellinger stands in the game. I mean, George Springer just signed a massive contract. He's ahead of him. I think the rest of this group is pretty disappointing. I love that. Shout out to former Dodger Alex Verdugo clocking in at number 10 on that spot. But, I mean, once you get past Springer, it is like falling off of a cliff. No disrespect to Trent Grisham, as my friend Daniel would say. He had a nice year, but, man, I mean, Bellinger clearly number 2, Trout clearly number 1, Springer clearly number 3. Seems pretty straightforward there.
Yeah, absolutely. And even Bellinger, he didn't have the MVP season he had the year before this past year, but we still see what he brings to the game on an everyday basis. Even when he's not crushing homers every day, he's still, he's still great in center field. One of the best defensive center fielders in baseball. He covers so much ground out there. It's like truly like incredible to watch. I love watching him play the outfield, and it's hilarious because this guy was a first baseman. He was not even an outfielder. Like, just goes to show you like what an athlete he is. But yeah, I'm expecting a big bounce back year from him in 2021. I know he's not happy with the year he had in 2020. Hopefully, he's not making too many swing tweaks. I feel like that's when he kind of goes wrong.
No, hopefully he is making swing tweaks back to 2019 version of his swing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let's hope he does that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me stretch out a little bit because we're about to do right field, and this is where my blood starts to boil a little bit. Mike Petrello was at the center of this. Mookie Betts is on the Dodgers, in case you didn't know that. Mookie Betts plays right field, in case you didn't know that. Mookie Betts is one of the best defensive right fielders in all of baseball history, in case you didn't know that. Mookie Betts also is one of the best offensive players in all of baseball. And yet, according to Mike Petrello, Mookie Betts is the second, not first, the second best right fielder in all of baseball. Mookie Betts was listed second on 3 out of 4 ballots. The shredder, which is sort of the computer-generated, numerical, statistical, whatever you want to call it, only ranking. Mookie Betts ranked first on that one. Everybody else had Mookie Betts second. And I already did a whole video on this. If you want to go watch it, you can. I'm irritated. This frustrates me. I never like to accuse anybody of posting clickbait or saying things just to get a reaction a la Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith. But this just doesn't make sense. I mean, you have to do so much projection positively in the favor of Soto, who, no disrespect to Soto, is amazing. One of the best offensive players in all of baseball. But he has never played right field, which he will be this year, so it's fair that he's on the list in right field. But he's never played right field. He's played left field, which is believed to be an easier defensive position than right, and he has been average at best, maybe below average. He has played right field in the minors, so we'll see what happens. But even if he is above Mookie offensively, which I'm willing to concede, the defense, the base running, etc., is so far in favor of Mookie Betts that this number makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I watched your video about this. I love the passion out of you, and yeah, I agree. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. Mookie Betts is arguably the second best player in all of baseball behind Mike Trout. So for him to be second best at his own position and he doesn't play the same position as Mike Trout seems a little ridiculous to me. And yeah, I'm with you on Soto. Like, I love that guy. He's one of my favorite players to watch. The year he just had offensively was nothing short of incredible, let alone like at age 21 or however young he is. The guy's just not even close to being in the prime of his career. So yeah, Soto's incredible, but even with the year he had, even with his OPS being 200, 300 points higher than Mookie still blew him out of the water in WAR. Like, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but Mookie was significantly ahead of him, and it's because there's more to baseball than just hitting, right? Like, especially in right field, defense is really important. That's probably, along with center field and shortstop, those are probably the 3 most important defensive positions. And there's no better defensive right fielder in baseball than Mookie. And then the base running too. Like, I don't forget right fielders. I don't think there's a better base runner in baseball, period.
I've never seen one. I've never seen one in his like in all of watching baseball. I've never seen someone run the bases like Mookie.
Yeah, like we see it on a nightly basis, whereas people on the East Coast might not because they're sleeping during Dodger games. I mean, I feel like they can't use that excuse because Mookie played in Boston for many years and everyone's seen him play. But yeah, just what he brings to the table on an everyday basis. There's truly no one like him. We saw all the game-changing plays he made in the postseason. So yeah, for me, Mookie's number one on this list. It shouldn't be close. Soto's great, Acuna's great, Aaron Judge is great, Bryce Harper, all those guys are great. This is another pretty stacked position, I'd say, especially compared to center and left. Like those were pretty weak, I'd say, compared to right. So yeah, for me, Mookie's number one on this list.
I mean, all you have to do is watch the postseason that just took place. Mookie Betts makes 3 unbelievable catches. He scores on infield groundouts twice. To win games. I mean, so I will be the first to admit that I have downplayed the importance of base running probably the entirety of my baseball watching life.
Yeah.
Until Mookie Betts shows up. And I've said it 100 times and I will say it 100 more. One of the first things I will ever remember about Mookie Betts was on opening day. And I kept hearing about how smart he is and how great of a base runner. And I'm like, how complicated is it to run bases? Like, you're fast. I've seen D. Gordon. Like, what are we talking about here? Yeah. And on opening day, he scores the game-winning run on the exact same play that he would then go on to basically win the World Series for the Dodgers, which is scoring from third on a ground out in the infield. And he did it time and time and time again. I can't remember a time he ever got thrown out. He scored multiple times, and it completely shifted for me because that's a run. Like, that was a game-changing play that people don't necessarily process. And so that's for me. I'm with you. Mookie is the second best player in all of baseball. He can't be the second best player at his position at the same time. So we're running out of time here, so let's fire through these. We got 2 more, and then we'll keep it moving. The next list was starting pitching. This was Petrello's list. He had Walker Buehler at number 6. Oh, Trevor Bauer at number 7, so he did make a top 10 list. And Clayton Kershaw at number 10. So there you go. The Dodgers having the 6th, 7th, and 10th best starting pitchers. Buehler and Kershaw were pretty interesting. Buehler averaged around 8. Kershaw averaged around 9. There was one guy that actually had neither of them in his top 10. Schroeder actually had Kershaw ahead of Buehler, 7th and 10th. So I guess that's the interesting one for me, Daniel, is to think, I thought it was pretty clear that Walker Buehler's better than Clayton Kershaw. No disrespect to Clayton Kershaw, obviously. I was interested to see Kershaw ahead of Buehler on one of these lists, although I will say, as good as Walker Buehler is in the postseason, I think sometimes as Dodger fans, we forget that his regular season numbers are really, really good, but not elite. And so I guess there's kind of a mix. Like, Buehler seems to almost get a bump. If Walker Buehler were doing his regular season performance in Cincinnati, say, I'm not sure he would be getting the top 10 love that he does.
No. Yeah, no, not at all. For me, I think the only reason he's in the top 10 is because of what he does in the postseason. Yeah. If you just look at his regular season numbers, he's not a top 10 pitcher, which when you're on the Dodgers doesn't mean a whole lot because we all know the Dodgers are making the postseason and he's, has to be at his best in the postseason and he knows that. So, yeah, I think I understand why the Shredder would have Kershaw above him. I'm with you, though. If I'm ranking, my top 10 starting pitchers in baseball, I'd have Buehler ahead of Kershaw at this point. But it's cool to see the Dodgers got 3 of the top 10 starters. Yeah. I hadn't seen Mike's list until you just put it up right there. I thought there was some interesting calls on there, like Aaron Nola he had in the top 5. I don't know if Aaron Nola cracks my top 10. Yeah. I love Lucas Giolito. I grew up with Lucas Giolito. I don't know if he cracks my top 10 either. There's some guys that didn't make this list that I probably would have in there. But yeah, I mean, it's cool seeing the Dodgers have 6 of the top 10 pitchers in baseball, even if they're none of the top 5, which it's a complete debate, who you have in your own personal top 5.
Yeah, and I mean, you just look at this list and think basically there's only 5 teams in baseball that would prevent you from saying we have the 3 best pitchers in a playoff series, which is an unbelievable thing when you then say, oh, by the way, we have the best offense in all of baseball as well right behind it. So, well, let's get one more. Yeah, well, and let's get to the bullpen. The bullpen is the second list besides left field that did not feature any Dodgers. No real surprise here. Liam Hendricks, who is a free agent just signed, was Petrello's number 1 relief pitcher. Obviously, Brad Hand is a guy who was a free agent. He was number 10 on this list. 2 guys that the Dodgers passed on in order to sign Blake Trinan, who did not appear in the top 10. I don't think the Dodgers, I don't think anybody, I'm actually positive no one would be surprised that Kenley Jansen is not on this list. Blake Trinan, probably the only guy that maybe could get there. But I mean, I think his market materialized in a way that shows you that he's thought of below Hendricks. Corey Knebel, I think, is a guy the Dodgers are hoping it someday maybe gets back there at some point this season. But the Dodger bullpen, we know, is a strength in numbers group. It is not going to blow you away with their best or their second best arm. Their goal is to say, but our eighth best relief pitcher is dramatically better than your eighth best relief pitcher. And over the course of a season and over the course of a complicated playoff series, that's going to give us an advantage. So any reactions there to the relief pitcher list in your mind?
Yeah, it wasn't a huge surprise to me that no Dodgers made that list. I feel like we've been talking about the bullpen all off season because for a while those were the only moves the Dodgers were making, and we've been saying the whole time that this bullpen is great. You know, arguably the best in baseball, but it does lack that elite top 10 arm, which is why when we were talking about bullpen moves, it's like if you're not getting one of those guys, then there's really, you know, it's not like the Dodgers need depth. It's not like they need, you know, middle tier guys. So, yeah, it wasn't a huge surprise to see them not have any top 10 guys. But like you said, it's strength in numbers. If they did an 11 through 30 on this list, the Dodgers might have 4 or 5 guys, you know, make the cut there. So it's still going to be a really good bullpen. But, yeah, there's no clear cut top guy, and that's why I think Dave Roberts is going to have some interesting decisions to make as far as roles go. Like, is Kenley your closer? Because there's no one really there. Like, no one has really overthrown him, I'd say. Like, there's no one that's you could say for sure 100%, yes, that guy is going to be better than Kenley Jansen in 2021. I know we probably got a lot of people, you know, watching this right now who don't love Kenley Jansen, and we're not sitting here defending him, but there's no one you could say with certainty is going to be better than him in 2021. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, who really emerges as the top guy down there. I feel like by the postseason last year, there was kind of not strict roles, but I feel like guys knew who's a high leverage guy, who's not. So I think every year is different. So it's going to be fun to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and some people in the comments, you know, Urias maybe if he were a full-time reliever. Again, I think people are remembering the Urias of Game 7 of the NLCS and Game 6 of the World Series. If you go back and look, I mean, he's been a reliever for stretches of his career, and it has not been dominant. I mean, it's been good. It's been an ERA, I believe, you know, maybe high 2s to mid 3s, somewhere in there. So he's good, but he doesn't have the strikeout numbers. He doesn't have the whiff percentage, that kind of thing. And there's not really any reason to believe that it's going to get there. I think if you want to bet on a Dodger at some point cracking this list, Gratterall is the obvious answer. Maybe a guy like Victor Gonzalez, who a lot of people like, Caleb Ferguson once he comes back healthy. The Dodgers do have some young arms. They've got some farm system arms that people like there as well. And as I said, I mean, Corey Knebel and Tommy Kahnle are both guys that I think at their best, you know, probably not top 10 pitchers. Knebel was obviously back in 2017. But, you know, those are guys with Trinan that you would like to say, hey, maybe if you did the 11 through 30, maybe the Dodgers do put Kahnle and Knebel and Gonzalez and Gratterall on that list. So we will see. Well, we had one other thing planned for tonight, but we're going to push that to next week. We had a mailbag question come in about my top 5 favorite players in Dodgers, top 5 Dodgers of our lifetime. Daniel and I both answered that question, but we're already over the hour mark, so let's skip that. Let's get to a couple mailbag questions. We've got some people asking. Eddie Garcia just threw this one out. Can you give me your opinion on Gavin Lux this season? Something you and I have touched on a little bit, Daniel. I know I would say as a headline, my confidence in Gavin Lux did not change after last year, and he was a top 5 prospect in all of baseball before that. I just simply believe you throw away 2020. The guy may or may not have contracted COVID. He was on the COVID list. He missed part of spring training. He comes in late. He has all these expectations on him. I just think it was the worst case scenario for a young guy. I understand the fear about the yips and the worries that people have there, but I'm still really, really high on Gavin Lux. I think he's the guy that people are sleeping on, that I think he can exceed expectations, and they were really, really high expectations for him a year ago.
Yeah, I'm with you on Lux. I feel like a lot of people are jumping off the bandwagon, and I'm still leading the charge. I feel like I'm still high on him. I agree with you. I think 2020 is just kind of a wash year. Like, things didn't seem to go right from the beginning. It was a short year. The Dodgers had other options, you know, at second base, so they didn't feel the need to really push him. So, yeah, I think I'm still high on him long term. I don't know. I know they're going to give him a chance to go out and win the starting second base job. I don't know if he will win it, you know, out of spring training. But I definitely think at some point in 2021 is where we see Gavin Lux really starting to break through and show us why he was, that consensus top 5 prospect just literally 1 year ago.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to throw Kevin Herrera. He's posted this in the chat about 5,000 times, pointing out that I said the Chiefs were going to smoke Tampa Bay. Could not have been more wrong. Could not have been more wrong on that one.
We're both on that, so we're both wrong there.
I've lived long enough to know that I shouldn't be betting against Patrick Mahomes, but I guess the flip side is I should never have been betting against Tom Brady in a Super Bowl. So there we go. We'll give him a shout out.
Let me just say though, that game kind of sucked. I was falling asleep the whole time. But yeah, congrats to Tom Brady. 7 rings. That's incredible.
Well, one funny story I saw on Twitter was, so I went to the University of Oregon. We had a running back, Kenyon Barner, that I'm sure people will remember, USC fans. He was really good for the Ducks, played with LaMichael James. He got his 3rd Super Bowl ring last night. He's a practice squatter for the Bucks. He was on the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl. I think that was the only active roster that he was on. And then he was a member of the Patriots at one point during one of the seasons they won. So he now has 3 Super Bowl rings, 2 of which he was not even sniffing the active roster. So shout out to Kenyon Barner.
Similar story to that is LaShawn McCoy is now a back-to-back Super Bowl champion and didn't play a single snap in either Super Bowl.
So wild. Okay, a couple more questions we've had. One guy was asking, we mentioned Matt Chapman earlier. You threw him out as a potential third base candidate. I think anytime you are a good player for the Oakland A's, you are just believed to be available. Chapman, this is his first year of arbitration, so he's under team control for 2 more years, which won't be, he's making $7 million this year. That number by year 3 will probably be up, $20 million-ish. So it's not going to be cheap, but it will be well below market. There's no indication that the A's are even considering, other than the fact that they are the A's and people speculate. So I'll phrase it this way. I know you like Matt Chapman. I like Matt Chapman. He's fantastic defensively. He's already on the West Coast. He's a great player. How high of a package would you be willing to offer the Oakland A's for Matt Chapman?
Yeah, I feel like if there's any guy to go out and get, that would be the guy. You mentioned we know Oakland's not going to pay him when the time comes, so I'm sure at some point they'll look to deal him. And if you could get him now when he's like you said, he's in his first year of arbitration, so he's got this season 28. And then 2. Yeah, this season and then 2 more, you're getting his prime years at a very reasonable price. I feel like that's a guy who you give up a lot for, that's and he's a right-handed bat, which the Dodgers need. He plays third base. That's kind of a perfect fit. So I'd be willing to, that's a guy I'd throw Dustin May in a package for. I don't know if I'd probably throw Keibert Ruiz in there too, like Dustin May, Keibert Ruiz, and like a couple other prospects, something like that.
Yeah, I think Ruiz and a guy like, without including Lux, I don't know what his reputation is around baseball. But yeah, that would be a fascinating when someone threw out maybe Cody Hosey. That's a steep price to pay, but if you're going to re-sign Seager and you're going to have Chapman for the next couple of years, then maybe Hosey comes expendable. But it's not cheap to acquire guys like that. But for a team like the Dodgers that is deep in prospects, even if their high end isn't as high as it has been, you look at the top 100 lists, usually we're used to seeing someone in the top 5 or top 10. Hasn't been the case this year. So let's see if we can find one more question in the chat, and then we'll call it a good one. Call it good on there. Let's see if we can find one here. I know people weren't happy with this guy mentioning that I had said Tampa Bay was going to lose constantly. We kind of mentioned this, so we'll do Mario Luigi fans. Shout out to Super Mario here. As far as, would you see Dave Roberts re-examining his reliever roles as closer if Kenley can't figure it out? How likely is it, do you think, this year? You and I are both, should say, I'm higher on Kenley Jansen than I think every other Dodger fan that I've ever met or talked to that's ever been on one of our shows, that's for sure. So the Dodgers have, for better or worse, held to a traditional closer role in the past. Kenley Jansen gets almost all of those appearances. I'll ask it this way. Do you expect that to change at any point in 2021? If with no roster moves, this is the group that they go forward with. Do you see anything happening this year that would cause the Dodgers to change that approach?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of dependent on Kenley. I think he's definitely going to get the first opportunity to be the closer. But I do think that this year the leash will be shorter than it has been in previous years for a couple of reasons. The first one being it's the final year of his deal. So it's not like, we're gonna piss this guy off now, and
Yeah.
we still got to pay him $20 million for 2 or 3 more years. That's not the case. This is his last year. I don't think they feel the need to be loyal to him anymore.
Yeah.
And secondly, this is arguably the best set of relievers he's had around him. So there's been some other years where he's faltered, but it's like, who's gonna take the job? They don't have another clear-cut option. So I think maybe this year, if we talked about how they don't have a top 10 reliever in baseball, but they have 4 or 5 guys who maybe could crack that if they have a good year. So we'll see who emerges from that group, and who knows, if one of those guys is having a great year and Kenley falters like he has in the past, then I don't think they would have any hesitation making that switch. And we even saw in the postseason last year, like it wasn't just like he still closed out some games, he still blew some, of course, we all watched, but it wasn't a case of any time the Dodgers had a lead in the 9th inning he was in. It wasn't that at all. I feel like other guys got save opportunities. And so I think that's how it's going to be. We'll see what Kenley does. I feel like it's up to him if he's going to maintain that job or not.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point. As high as I am on Jansen, the fact that the Dodgers have already gone away from him as closer in the postseason last year, I think tells you everything you need to know about where they're at. I do think Kenley Jansen remains such an influential guy in the clubhouse, a leader. I do think that there is a little bit of hand-holding that has to go on there, even if it is his last year, just because of the influence that he has. But, yeah, I think there's going to be enough people around Kenley Jansen that probably see the other side of it now, where the players aren't going to revolt if Kenley Jansen is taken out of the closer role. I think, A, Roberts has earned the respect of all those guys, but B, I think there's enough people around that could say, hey, Kenley, you know what? This is what's best for the team. You just got to go out there and prove it. Go back to being your dominant self, and we'll see what happens. And so I definitely am with you. I don't think there's anybody in the room that Kenley looks at and says, this guy is clearly better to me, I'm going to go down easy. But on the flip side, I think he also has experienced already what it looks like and feels like. And who knows? Best case scenario is you get Jansen to put his arm around a guy like Brusdar Graterol and Victor Gonzalez and say, hey, I'm a legend at this team, and I will always be a legend for the Dodgers because of what I've done over the last 7 to 10 years. Now let me help you be the next Kenley Jansen, whether it's Gonzalez or Graterol. That would be best case scenario. So we'll see if that happens. But yeah, my initial reaction was I think he's going to be the closer, and I think he'll be good enough not to ever do something dramatic enough to lose it. But to your point, the Dodgers have kind of already pulled him from that role unofficially. 70, even if he's the closer 75% of the time, that would be a dramatic difference from previous years. So. Yeah. Well, hey, we've gone long. We're almost at 1 hour and 15, and we could keep going here. So shout out to Trevor Bauer for giving us something to talk about.
Yeah, the first time we've had actual news to talk about.
I know.
So, yeah.
Apologies to all you. I told Daniel today, I said, man, I really hope Justin Turner waits until later in the week to sign because we need some content for multiple shows. We can't just have all these guys, all the news break in one single episode. So hopefully Justin Turner signs soon. As I said, 51 days until the regular season. Spring training for some teams, I think, is like 9 days away. So it's coming up quick. MLB and MLBPA agreed today on health and safety protocols. So the season is a go. It's going at regular speed. Spring training is starting when it's going to start, and we're looking ahead for that. So we appreciate you joining us. As always, DodgerBlue.com is what presents our show. This is DodgerHeads. Make sure you're subscribed to all the social media. DodgerBlue1958 on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and of course here at YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, please click the subscribe button. Ring the notification bell, and hey, if you've got Dodger fans in your life, I don't often make the shameless plug, but I will tonight. If you've got Dodger fans in your life, make sure they subscribe. Make sure they've got the notification bell rung. Give us the thumbs up. We appreciate you as always. That's Daniel. My name is Jeff. We appreciate you. We'll see you later. And as always, we're going to leave with the words of the great Vin Scully.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the base.